I never expected to inherit anything, much less an entire mansion. The letter arrived on a dull afternoon, its envelope aged and yellowed, as if it had been waiting for me far longer than it should have. The handwriting was formal, almost too perfect, and the message was concise. You are the last of our bloodline. The house is yours now. Come before it's too late. There was no return address, only the name Blackwood Estate, a place I had never heard of, yet the name felt strangely familiar, like a half-forgotten melody from childhood. At first, I considered ignoring it. I had no interest in old family matters, and certainly no desire to visit some decaying relic in the middle of nowhere. But reality has a way of making choices for us. My financial situation was bleak, and the idea of selling an inherited property was too tempting to dismiss. So, with more reluctance than curiosity, I packed my car and made the drive deep into the countryside, where the roads twisted into dense forests that swallowed the last signs of civilization. The moment I passed through the rusted iron gates of Blackwood Estate, I felt it, a pressure in the air, heavy and expectant. The mansion stood at the end of a long, winding path, its towering silhouette stark against the dying light of dusk. Ivy crawled up the stone walls like veins, and the windows, though intact, were dark and lifeless. I stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet disturbingly loud in the stillness. The house loomed before me, its gabled roof and intricate carvings giving it an eerie elegance. As I approached the front door, the scent of damp wood and something older, something rotten, lingered in the air. The key fit perfectly, turning with an unsettling smoothness. The door creaked open, revealing a vast foyer, its wooden floors dusty yet oddly undisturbed. A grand chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled with time. Paintings of unfamiliar faces lined the walls, their eyes following me as I stepped inside. For a moment, silence reigned, and then, from somewhere deep within the house, I heard it, a whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the distant rustling of leaves. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to shake it off. Old houses creak. The wind plays tricks. It was nothing. At least, that's what I told myself. I spent the next hour exploring, finding each room frozen in time, filled with antique furniture and relics of a family I never knew. In the study, an old grandfather clock stood motionless, its hand stuck at 3:15. The dining hall, with its long table and decayed velvet chairs, looked as if a meal had been abandoned mid-course decades ago. Then there was the library, a towering room with walls lined with books from floor to ceiling. Dust motes danced in the dim light of a flickering chandelier. As I scanned the shelves, my fingers brushed against a peculiar book, its leather cover worn and cracked. When I pulled it free, a folded letter slipped out from between its pages. It was dated nearly a century ago. The ink had faded, but I could still make out the words. Do not stay past the first night. The house remembers. The house waits. A sudden gust of wind made the chandelier sway, its crystals chiming softly. My skin prickled. There was no open window. A cold dread settled in my stomach, but I refused to let fear dictate my actions. I was exhausted from the trip, and my mind was likely playing tricks on me. I decided to stay in one of the bedrooms, reasoning that I would explore further in the morning. The room I chose was modest compared to the rest of the house, its walls adorned with faded wallpaper and a large, four-poster bed draped in old, moth-eaten curtains. As I settled in, the weight of the day finally caught up with me. The mattress was firmer than I expected, and despite the unease curling in my chest, exhaustion took over. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up suddenly to the sound of whispers. They were closer now, not the distant murmurs from before, but right outside my door. I held my breath, my body rigid, listening. The whispering didn't stop. If anything, it grew more insistent, the words almost forming something recognizable almost. Then, the doorknob rattled. A sharp, deliberate movement. Not the wind, not my imagination. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing down on me like a suffocating weight. My eyes locked on the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it never did. Instead, the whispers faded, retreating into the depths of the house. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there, wide-eyed, listening to the silence, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the house remained still, watching, waiting, and as dawn finally crept through the dust-covered windows, I knew one thing for certain. I was not alone in this house. Morning arrived, but it brought little comfort. The mansion, bathed in pale sunlight, felt no less foreboding than it had the night before. Shadows clung stubbornly to the corners, and the air remained thick with that same oppressive stillness. I told myself that exhaustion had played tricks on me, that the whispers, the rattling doorknob, the heavy silence were all just my mind unraveling in an unfamiliar place. But deep down, I knew better. Something was here, watching, waiting, determined to push through my unease. I decided to explore the house more thoroughly in daylight. If there were logical explanations for what I had experienced, I needed to find them. The first place I returned to was a library. The book with the hidden letter still lay where I had left it, its pages brittle with age. I skimmed through the rest of it, but the contents were mundane, historical accounts, records of the estate's early days. Whatever warning had been left inside, it seemed isolated, a single voice lost to time. I searched the shelves, hoping to find more letters or journals, something that might explain what had happened here. But there was nothing, at least, nothing obvious. Just rows upon rows of books, untouched and waiting. Moving deeper into the house, I found a door that had gone unnoticed the night before. It was locked, its surface adorned with intricate carvings, symbols I didn't recognize, yet felt unnervingly familiar. Unlike the rest of the mansion, which had a certain decayed elegance, this door looked wrong, as if it didn't belong here. I tried forcing it open, but it wouldn't budge. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to unlock it. Just those strange carvings, staring back at me like unblinking eyes. A sudden chill ran through me. The air shifted, and then, a breath, not mine, right behind me. I spun around, my pulse hammering, but the hallway was empty, just dust and silence. But I felt it, a presence, something standing just beyond my sight, watching. I stepped away from the door, trying to steady my breathing. It was the house, this place, its atmosphere. It was getting to me. That was all. I had to keep moving. The next room I entered was the parlor, a grand space filled with antique furniture covered in dust-laden sheets. A massive fireplace stood at the far end, its mantel adorned with cracked porcelain figurines and faded photographs. I lifted one of the frames, my fingers brushing away years of grime. The picture inside was old, at least a century. A family stood in stiff, formal poses, a tall, severe-looking man, a woman with cold, hollow eyes, and between them a child, a girl. Her face was obscured, the photograph warped and blackened around where her features should have been. I felt a deep, visceral discomfort looking at it. Something about the girl's ruined image felt intentional, like it had been erased. As I set the frame down, a sharp knocking sound echoed through the house. 3 deliberate knocks, coming from upstairs. I swallowed hard. I had been alone all morning. There was no one else here. Right. Still, my feet carried me toward the staircase before I could talk myself out of it. Each step groaned under my weight, the wood old and protesting. The upper hallway stretched before me, lined with more doors, all slightly ajar. I followed the sound to one of the larger bedrooms. The door was wide open, revealing a room frozen in time. The bed was made, the dresser adorned with trinkets as if its owner had just stepped out. But the air felt wrong. Thick, charged. And then I saw it. On the vanity table, carved deep into the wood, were words, jagged, desperate. "Who are you?" A chill crawled up my spine. The edges of the letters were fresh, as if they had just been carved. A shadow moved in the mirror's reflection. I turned sharply. No one was there. But when I looked back at the mirror, the surface had changed. My reflection was still there, standing in the empty room. But just behind me, in the reflection only, stood a figure. Tall, gaunt, featureless, watching. The moment I blinked, it was gone. I stumbled backward, knocking over a small jewelry box. The lid snapped open as it hit the floor, and something rolled out, a delicate silver key, for the locked door. I didn't question it. I didn't want to. I just took the key, my hands trembling, and left the room without looking back. As I made my way back downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had woken something up, that whatever had been lingering in the shadows was now fully aware of me. And it was only just beginning. I stood in front of the locked door, the silver key cold and unsettling in my palm. The carvings on the wood seemed deeper now, more pronounced, like they had shifted overnight. A trick of the dim light, I told myself. But I knew better. I hesitated. Every rational part of me screamed not to do it, to turn around, leave the house, and never look back. But something stronger, something insidious, urged me forward. The same force that had guided me to this place in the first place, that had whispered through the walls, calling me deeper. With a deep breath, I inserted the key. The lock turned easily, as if it had been waiting. The door groaned open, revealing darkness. A staircase descended into the unseen below, the air thick with damp, stale decay. A basement, but not just any basement. I stepped forward, the wooden floor beneath me giving way to cold stone. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in visible puffs. Something felt off. The walls were lined with old, rotting shelves, stacked with things that had no place in a house like this. Rusted chains, broken glass, unmarked jars filled with dark, dried substances. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the objects became. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, barely illuminated by the weak light filtering from above, stood a chair. Old, wooden, positioned in the center of the space. Restraints dangled from its arms. The floor beneath it was stained. A deep, instinctual dread settled in my stomach. This place, this room, had seen suffering, had heard screams, I wasn't alone down here. I could feel it. A faint rustling sound echoed from the shadows. I turned sharply, my pulse hammering, and then a whisper, not in my head, not a memory, right next to my ear. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried something beneath it, something ancient and hungry. My body locked up. I felt pressure on my shoulder, a presence pressing into me, though nothing was there. And then the whispering grew. Not just one voice, many, murmuring, overlapping, seeping into the very air around me. I turned, stumbling back toward the stairs. The chair shifted, just an inch, just enough for the old wood to creak. I didn't look back. I ran. I reached the top, slamming the door shut behind me. The whispering stopped, abrupt, like it had never been there at all. But I could still feel it. Something had changed. I was no longer just an intruder in this house. Now I was part of it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. The whispering, soft at first, barely distinguishable from the wind rattling against the old windows. But as the night dragged on, the voices grew clearer, curling around my thoughts like smoke. "He's listening. He knows. You should have left." I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. It's not real. It's not real. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. At some point, exhaustion must have won, because I woke up to the sound of something moving downstairs. A slow, deliberate dragging noise. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was coming from the main hall. I forced myself to move, each step down the hallway heavy, as if the house itself resisted my presence. The floorboards groaned beneath me, but there was another sound beneath it, something breathing. I reached the staircase, peering over the railing, and then I saw it, a shape barely visible in the dim light, standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not moving, not speaking, just waiting. The air in my lungs froze. My body refused to move. The presence wasn't solid, but it wasn't entirely transparent either, just a dark, shifting mass that shouldn't be there. And then it turned its head. Not a normal movement, not human. The angle was wrong, the motion too slow, too deliberate. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it staring at me. The whispering began again, rising from every direction, slipping beneath my skin like cold fingers. "You let him out. He was waiting. You shouldn't have opened the door." I gripped the railing, my nails digging into the wood. The figure twitched, a sudden, jerky motion like a puppet with tangled strings. Then it moved. Not toward me, toward the basement door. My stomach twisted. No, I had closed that door. I had locked it, but as I watched, the figure pushed it open, disappearing into the darkness below. A gust of freezing air rushed up from the basement, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of rotting wood and something else, something deeper, older. And the door, it stayed open, like an invitation. I should have run. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to turn around, to get the hell out of that house and never look back. But something kept me rooted to the spot. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something worse, a compulsion, a pull toward the darkness that I couldn't explain. The basement door yawned open before me, a black void swallowing what little light the house had left. The air spilling from it was damp and wrong, thick with decay and something old, something untouched by time. The whispering had stopped. Silence had settled over everything, a stillness so deep that it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I took a step forward, then another. The stairs groaned under my weight, the wood soft and slick, as if it had been left to rot for centuries. The deeper I went, the colder it became, the air pressing against me like an unseen force. My breath came out in sharp, shallow gasps. And then, at the bottom of the stairs, I saw it, the source of the presence. It wasn't just a figure. It was a door, one that hadn't been there before. Massive, ancient. Its surface was covered in symbols carved deep into the wood, symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a normal door. It was a barrier, something that was never meant to be opened, and it was slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness seeped from the gap, and from within it, something moved. A hand thin, elongated fingers curling around the edge of the door. Then another. I stepped back, my pulse a frantic drum in my chest. The whispering returned, not from around me, but from inside my head. Too late. You let it in. You let it in. The door burst open. A rush of cold, consuming blackness flooded the basement, engulfing me before I could even scream. And then, nothing. Just silence. Just the whispering. If you enjoyed this chilling story, don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Fear and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Here, you'll find more real stories filled with mystery, psychological horror, and the supernatural every week. Before you go, make sure to check out the 2 videos that just popped up in the end screen. I promise, they'll leave you with goosebumps. See you next time, if you dare.